What if, like, your gut feeling could actually, like, expose the truth? Imagine a world, just swimming in a sea of misinformation, where trust is like a luxury only a few can afford.
Yeah.
How would you navigate that?
Yeah, how would you even know what to believe? It's fascinating how this speculative design project, Echo Chamber, uses that concept as like a jumping off point.
Okay.
Imagine a world where communities are using BCIs to kind of collectively filter information based on their shared emotional responses.
That's a wild idea, right? But it's actually riffing on older BCI tech, not some like super advanced future stuff.
Right.
The project description mentions a future where things have gotten pretty rough. Like manipulative neuromarketing has eroded trust in authorities and global supply chains have collapsed.
Yeah.
So people are turning to older, more durable technology for solutions. That's where these legacy BCIs come in.
And that's what makes it so compelling. It's not some like far off sci-fi fantasy. It's rooted in the very real anxieties we have today about information overload and the breakdown of trust.
Yeah.
It asks us to consider what we might be willing to sacrifice for a sense of shared reality.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this echo chamber would actually work. It's all about harnessing the power of the hive mind, right?
Right. The idea is that these BCIs would allow a community to kind of pool their emotional responses to information, almost like a collective lie detector test.
Oh.
If something triggers widespread feelings of unease or distrust, it could be a sign that the information is like deceptive or biased.
So it's like a community-powered canary in the coal mine for sniffing out BS. But how would that actually play out in a real community?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're scrolling through your newsfeed and you come across an article that makes you feel uneasy, maybe even a little angry.
Yeah.
Your BCI picks up on those emotional signals and shares them anonymously with the rest of your community.
So everyone is kind of feeding their gut reactions into this system, creating a sort of emotional barometer for the information that is circulating.
Exactly. And if enough people are having negative reactions to a particular piece of information, it might trigger a warning signal for the community, prompting them to take a closer look or seek out alternative sources.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But the project description also mentions this AI designer, Barrios 10425. He's the brains behind the whole system.
Right. Barrios 10425. And it's important to remember he's a fictional AI, by the way.
Okay.
Takes a really fascinating approach, weaving together behavioral economics, game theory, even cognitive science, to map out how this system could function in the real world.
So he's not just thinking about the tech itself. He's thinking about the human element.
Right.
How people would actually interact with this system and what the potential consequences might be.
And those consequences are pretty profound, right? We're talking about potentially reshaping the way we understand truth and reality itself.
It gets to the heart of what makes this project so unsettling. It's not just like a cool tech solution. It's forcing us to confront a much deeper question. How vulnerable are we to manipulation? Especially as technology becomes more sophisticated. I mean, think about the ads you see online and how they're already targeting you based on your data.
And now imagine a system that's tapping into your emotions, potentially even influencing them without you even realizing it.
That raises the stakes considerably. So on the one hand, this echo chamber could be a powerful tool for communities to fight back against misinformation and rebuild trust.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it could also open the door to new forms of manipulation and control.
Exactly. And that's why speculative design projects like this are so valuable. They're not about predicting the future. They're about provoking us to think critically about the potential consequences of emerging technologies.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own anxieties about the future, but also offering a glimmer of hope. What if we could use technology to empower ourselves to make informed decisions collectively? It feels like we are on this razor's edge, doesn't it? Where the potential for good and the potential for harm are almost perfectly balanced. And how would we even begin to address those risks?
Well, that's where Barrios 10425's design philosophy gets really interesting. He's not naive about the potential pitfalls. In fact, he bakes in questions about free will and technological determinism right into the project.
Wait, break that down for me. What does that even mean in this context?
Think of it this way. If you're constantly surrounded by these emotional signals from your community, are you really making choices freely? Or are you being subtly influenced by the collective? And if technology is shaping our emotional responses, are we becoming less human, more like machines?
Those are some heavy questions, but I guess that's the point, right? To make us confront these uncomfortable truths before we get swept up in the tide of technological progress.
Exactly, and Barrios 10425 doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He's more interested in sparking a conversation, getting people to think critically about the trade-offs between individual autonomy and collective well-being.
So it's not just a blueprint for a new technology. It's a philosophical exploration of what it means to be human in a technologically mediated world.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, hey, here's a potential future, but are we really sure we want it?
Right, and that's where things get really personal, right? Because we're all already living in a world where algorithms are shaping our perceptions and influencing our choices. This project just takes that to the next level, making those influences more explicit, more visceral.
And that viscerality is what makes echo chamber so compelling, but also so unsettling. We're talking about a system that's literally tapping into our emotions, our most primal responses.
Imagine if someone could hack into that system, exploit those emotional vulnerabilities for their own gain. We could see a whole new level of manipulation, a kind of weaponized empathy.
It's like a dystopian nightmare straight out of science fiction. But it also raises the question, how do you even begin to regulate something like this? How do you ensure that it's being used ethically and responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because technology often outpaces our ability to understand its full implications, let alone create ethical frameworks to guide its development and deployment.
And with something as powerful as this echo chamber, the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about protecting our privacy. We're talking about protecting our very sense of self.
It's a sobering thought, but it also underscores the importance of having these conversations now before it's too late. We need to be thinking critically about the kind of future we want to create, one where technology empowers us rather than enslaves us.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential downsides of echo chamber. But let's flip the script for a moment. What are some of the potential benefits? How could this system be used for good?
Well, imagine a community that's been ravaged by misinformation, where trust has eroded to the point where people don't even know who to believe anymore. Echo chamber could be a way for them to rebuild that trust, to create a shared sense of reality based on their collective wisdom.
So it's like a tool for collective healing, a way to bridge divides and foster empathy.
Exactly, and in a world that's becoming increasingly polarized, that's a pretty powerful proposition.
But even if it's used for good, there are still some thorny ethical questions to grapple with. Like, who gets to decide what constitutes a healthy emotional response? And what about individual differences in emotional sensitivity?
Those are excellent points, and it gets to the heart of the tension between individual autonomy and collective well-being. Is it ever okay to sacrifice one for the other, and who gets to make that decision?
It's like we're constantly walking this tightrope, trying to find the balance between harnessing the power of technology and safeguarding our humanity.
And echo chamber forces us to confront that tension head-on. It's not offering easy answers. It's challenging us to think deeply about the kind of future we want to create and the role technology will play in shaping that future.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we mentioned earlier, that photo caption from the project, repurposed relic, a symbol of collective scrutiny. Such a loaded phrase, isn't it?
It is, because it evokes both hope and fear. On the one hand, it speaks to the resilience of communities, their ability to adapt and repurpose old technologies to meet new challenges. But on the other hand, it also hints at the potential for surveillance and control.
Yep. It makes you wonder who's doing the scrutinizing and for what purpose. Is it a tool for empowerment or a mechanism for conformity?
And that's the question echo chamber poses to each of us. Are we willing to surrender some of our individual autonomy for the sake of a shared reality? And if so, at what cost?
So where do we go from here? We've explored the potential benefits and the potential risks of echo chamber. We've talked about the ethical dilemmas and the philosophical questions it raises. But what does it all mean for the average person trying to make sense of the world?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Echo chamber isn't just a thought experiment. It's a call to action.
Right.
It's urging each of us to become more aware of how technology shapes our perceptions and influences our beliefs.
It's like Barrios is saying, don't just passively consume information, question it, think critically, engage in dialogue, and most importantly, be mindful of the emotional forces that are shaping your worldview.
Because those emotional forces are becoming increasingly powerful in a world where technology is blurring the lines between reality and simulation. Echo chamber takes that to the extreme, but we're already seeing glimpses of it in the way social media algorithms amplify outrage and polarization.
It's like we're all living in our own little echo chambers, surrounded by information that confirms our existing biases. And it's becoming harder and harder to break out of those chambers to have meaningful conversations with people who see the world differently.
And that's where the real danger lies. Not in technology itself, but in our own willingness to surrender our critical thinking skills to the algorithms, to the collective.
So how do we fight back? How do we cultivate a healthy skepticism without becoming completely cynical or detached?
It's a tough balance, but it starts with awareness. Recognize that you're being manipulated, that your emotions are being targeted. Seek out diverse perspectives, challenge your own assumptions, and don't be afraid to disconnect from the digital noise every now and then to reconnect with your own inner compass.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify, but in the age of echo chamber, it might be more like feel but question.
Exactly. And that questioning, that critical engagement is what will ultimately determine whether technology becomes a tool for liberation or a mechanism for control.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into echo chamber, we leave you with this final thought. The future is not predetermined. It's something we're actively shaping with every choice we make, every click we take, every emotion we allow ourselves to feel. Choose wisely.
And remember, the most important conversations often happen outside the echo chamber. Share this deep dive with others who might be interested in exploring these ideas. The future of truth depends on it.
Thanks for joining us on Exploring Futures. Until